I'm Katherine Gypson for AAM Insight. Today I'm here with Bryan Single, producer and director of Children of War, a documentary about Ugandan child soldiers. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You've done this documentary about the conflict in northern Uganda. Can you tell us how you found the story and what led you to get so involved in it?
I really felt like there was not enough attention in the media in general about the consequences of war. We see a lot about other aspects of war, but we never see the emotional consequences on soldiers and on societies and their families. So the process of this rehabilitation center is all about emotional trauma and recovery and reintegration into society, returning home. These were themes that I felt were lacking in the media, so I wanted to explore those. I thought it would be good. People might get something out of it.
Can you give us some of the background on the Lord's Resistance Army and the conflict in northern Uganda?
Sure. It started in 1986. The Lord's Resistance Army is a group led by a man named Joseph Kony, who claims himself to be a prophet and a spirit oracle. And initially he did start out as a traditional healer, a medicine man who apparently healed a lot of people through traditional medicines. And so he was respected in the tribe, the community. And he sort of took that power and started a guerrilla movement against the government. But ultimately what happened is that he didn't get the public support he needed to continue his manifesto, his movement. So that's when he decided to start abducting children to serve as his army. And so that was starting around 1987. So for the past 20 years, he's abducted over 35,000 kids, boys and girls, ages from generally between age 9 and 15. And they sort of form the core of his army.
So this Rochelle Rehabilitation Center, how did it get started?
It was started by a journalist from Belgium who went over to cover the story, and I think it was around 2002, and she covered the story of a sister, a nun named Sister Raquel. She was an Italian nun who was the headmaster of this girls' school. Mm-hmm. And the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, had gone in and abducted almost 170 schoolgirls, and she heroically chased after the commander who abducted them in the middle of the night, went out into the bush, and managed, which was like a suicidal mission almost. The LRA is so dangerous. She managed to negotiate, I think 130 or something of their return, the girls' return. So this journalist named Els de Timmerman wrote a book called A Bouquet Girls about this story, and it became pretty well known in Europe. And she took the proceeds from that book and started this rehabilitation center in 2002.
So you getting back to that time when the children are abducted from their homes, can you tell us more about the process of what happens to them after they've been abducted?
I would say that it's uniformly the same, that when they're abducted, they're initiated into the army through violence. So that can take a number of courses. Either they're forced to kill their relatives upon being abducted, so they now have nothing to go back to. They've killed their family, they've burned their own homes, and they're now immediate pariahs in the society. They have nothing to go back to. So usually that, or generally they're forced to kill somebody in the first week or two. It's a sort of shared bloodletting, and then there are also sort of psychological tactics that the LRA commanders use to make sure that these kids don't escape. And most of them are religious in nature. So for example, they always take shea nut oil and they cross their foreheads and their feet and their wrists and their chests, and they tell them that if they try to escape, that this oil is a magical force that will make them walk in circles, and they'll walk right back into the hands of their captors, and then their punishment will be death. So as kids, they take this in, they believe it, and they're held captive by fear, basically.
There's a very effective moment in the film when one of the children says, "I'll never forgive the people who forced me into war," something along the lines of, "I would be ashamed to face them." And the rehab center uses different forms of art and music and other forms of therapy to allow the children to work out these feelings.
Mm-hmm.
What did they find were particularly effective forms, and what didn't really work with the kids?
The focus was truth-telling. You have to get your story out. That was the first thing. And get every detail out. Don't repress anything. So that was number one. And number two was this was all through the guidance of the counselors.
Right.
The number two was understand your feelings. A lot of these kids, were suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, which the symptoms are guilt, mistrust, fear, nightmares, isolation, depression, and so understanding your feelings as a way to sort of break through that, some self-reflection, was very important in order for them to express themselves. And of course the creative aspects of music, dance, art always helps, because it's a personal expression. You express your demons through creativity rather than through destruction.
So looking back after all this time that you spent with these children in Uganda, is there an image or a moment that you'll keep looking back on?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know. That's a tough question. I just ultimately was inspired by their process of truth-telling and self-exploration, exploration of their feelings as a way to heal. I sort of call it the journey into the dark night of the soul. There's a poem by Wendell Berry that I really like that sort of sums it all up. He says, to go into the dark with a light is to know only the light. To know the dark, go without sight, and find too that the dark blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. So this idea that illumination comes from self-reflection within, understanding the unconscious feelings and articulating them, that's our path towards healing in general as human beings, and also obviously for these child soldiers, that's the necessary path towards reintegration and becoming the peace that they seek.